This is Thorfinn. You might not recognize a similar frame from the anime because they removed it, and so I feel like I am not represented in the anime. Cause as I am writing this, my face looks like this somewhat. Jaw surgery, I didn't get beat up or anything, which is also a reason I couldn't record sooner. Anyway, let's finally get into the technically last episode of Vinland, adapting chapters 98 and 99, and not called Birth of a Warrior, unfortunately, I remembered. Good episode, not perfect, but it's the end of Vinland, I can't not like it, not get a little emotional. I should first finish talking about the Canute stuff. Great visuals in this scene, some creativity in here, and look at this Thorfinn, beautiful, I agree with Canute. Now, there are some things I disagree with. The manga version was more vibrant and intense. Thorfinn amping up, Swain growing increasingly more insistent and panicked, the spears closing in. It's more frantic and quick-paced, which helps selling the point of this scene, which we'll talk about in a bit. Another point where it felt different, Thorfinn's declaration that he will run is met with more immediately comedic reactions in the manga, which I find fun. Canute is completely baffled, he mocks Thorfinn a bit more too. Before he laughs at him, he looks like he might be insulted. The manga goes through all these phases, emotions and tones. The anime stays on a certain mood, one music track. It's a bit duller, but it still works. Especially in the end with the sun going down, for the sake of those who cannot live in the world you create. For me and for you. That hit. They also added the Thorfinn Askeladd line, but nowhere near as good as the one they took out. What's happening here is Canute gets suspicious. He starts believing Thorfinn could be a threat to him, like with Harald, like with Edric, like with the English. Everyone is a threat. These dangers cannot be risked. He has to defend his power, remain in control. But he's wrong. Thorfinn was not about to attack him, obviously. Canute got riled up for no reason. His paranoia is causing him to make bad mistakes. Yeah, Thorfinn had no plan. He just wanted to understand, not force him to submission. And he admits he cannot judge. The path Canute is proposing is valid. I would say it's necessary for the world to change. That's unfortunately in part how it has to be done. But that's not all there is to it. If Canute continues compromising on his paradise in order to secure it, then he'll compromise it out of existence. If Canute uses might to solve everything, he'll be the same as any other Viking leader, no matter his intent. There's no point where all threats will be gone, leaving him in peace to create this paradise. Every human can be an enemy in Canute's eyes, including the people he's ruling and he's supposedly building this utopia for. No matter how powerful, he's still vulnerable. He's not a god, he's a human, and that means he'll have to cooperate with other humans and accept that vulnerability if he wants to achieve anything worthwhile. It can't all be might and power. There's no changing this world without risk. That's why this status quo is so persistent. Canute will have to trust and give up control to some extent. His apparent failure in evaluating Thorfinn here should clue him in on these things. Thorfinn represents that other method that Canute is missing, the willingness to put himself in such great risk in order to just talk things out and cooperate. But Canute and Thorfinn together don't make this world balanced, cause Canute's power is immense. He's the one that must make sacrifices, so he makes the most obvious one. Eases up on the English, which also means not needing to steal farms to fund his occupation force. So Mr. Steal Your Girl was right all along. It wasn't even such a wild idea, it's the first thing he thought. But Canute was too scared to do that. And it worked, just like with Thorfinn. Turns out, not everything that can potentially be a threat is one. That is the kind of leadership Canute needs to pursue. And mind you, it doesn't change Canute's whole approach. Not everything will be like this, but there needs to be a balance. Those occasional steps to the right direction need to be made. Okay, this was the hardest part to communicate. The lyricism is always layered on thick when Canute is talking, something I'm not entirely sure it's good or not, even when thinking about his character. When Canute laughs, I don't feel that at all. It's a bit awkward, it kind of pisses me off really. Except when he mocks Thorfinn, that's funny, it's convincing. There's an air of fakeness, I guess. It just feels performative really, like everything Canute does. All this pretentious spiel for something that can be explained in simpler terms. When it's Thorfinn and Einar talking like that, it comes off more genuine. There's some innocence and ignorance to it. And yeah, Canute as a king, he has to be performative, we've seen that. And he's also actually psychotic, which justifies this behavior even more. But I think it unintentionally affects the perception of this character. I've seen it in other people, but me too. I find him endearing now because he's funny, but in my first readings I really disliked him. Maybe making you more hostile and suspicious of Canute now that he's in a position of authority can be a good thing, but I don't believe it's intentional, and I don't think I'm having the correct emotional reaction to this moment. earlier I'm chuckling and now my face is soured. I guess my point is, if I were Wolf, I would not associate with this rich boy theater kid more than I had to bed his sister. The Canute stuff was the biggest point of the finale. Now let's talk about the changes. Einar and Thorfinn deciding to go to Vinland in front of Arnheide's grave is a scene that originally was placed right after Arnheide's death, which colors Thorfinn's motivations a bit when he goes to talk to Canute. And in and of itself, it's not a rearrangement that I have any issue with. It's still impactful, it still makes sense where it's placed, it's mostly about what their motivations will be after the arc, and it talks a bit about Arnheide's death, which works just as well here. It is about Thorfinn's struggle to, amidst all this tragedy, find something that's still worth living for instead of choosing death. And creating that falls neatly into Thorfinn's path of atonement. It's that personal connection. It's for the ones he killed and people who are sad and suffering, and it's for him. Iconic moment. There's a bit extra in its lead up and in the beginning, it's fine. Now, you should be able to see how things might have changed because of this rearrangement before this. And in this episode, they couldn't have Thorfinn looking like this in this scene, could they? Cowards. In the rest of the stuff, they connected this with the small additions in episode 1, which was fun. They removed the narration about the fates of all the characters aside Canute, which was not as fun. That is a miss, I think. Thorgil not ever been seen again is a good clarification that he will not appear again, so people don't get attached to that idea because of some mental gymnastics of how it is presented. And I think it was important to say that Olmar took responsibility and paid reparations to all of the families that had dead or wounded, and that cost him most of the Kettil family's wealth and farmland. The final goodbyes are mostly the same, but it soured me again that the Kettil bitterness is glossed over, Thorfinn in the manga exclaiming that he doesn't want Kettil's thanks. And another thing that I'm not very into, any masturbatory dialogue about Thorfinn and Einar and how great they are. I like that Pater was also given a small conclusion at the end, unlike the manga, but goddamn I get it. Thorfinn and Einar are gods among men, I understand. This episode mostly looked great, but especially at the end, you could see some messiness. It didn't bother me too much, it felt like all the scars and fatigue of this production put on display as the arc finally ends. But we have one more episode, adapting a single chapter, chapter 100. And this episode looks pretty good too, even though it doesn't really deserve it. Well, some stuff from chapter 101 is adapted too, we'll talk about it. And it's mostly perfectly serviceable material, but not particularly standout. It's exciting to finally be back to Iceland after so long and to see how everything's changed. But this sort of reunion stuff isn't really the thing I'm here for, you know? It's the necessary emotional connective tissue that makes the story feel more natural and organic. Thorfinn meeting Helga is competent, but not particularly interesting. I find myself digging for details that aren't really there. My favorite reunion here is the first Ylva one, because it's a very uniquely Ylva reaction, and it feeds into this little identity crisis thing Thorfinn has. His long absence is having very realistic psychological repercussions that the story decides to address. And that is great, that is interesting to me. It doesn't play out completely generically. It even utilizes Baga as well and gives him at least a little bit of characterization, and generally it has some entertaining interactions. I find myself liking a lot of the comedy here too, especially around Bagais, although the anime has its fair share of lingering too much on it. The thing that really surprised me is they gave Ari a proper emotional scene. This stuff gets to me, man. The Dama side character is taken seriously when I least expect him to. Good scene. Ylva punches Thorfinn, bad scene. I mean, the gag kinda works first time. We got a very Ylva reaction before. Doing it again more comedically is worse and has no purpose. Too much. I mean, I was laughing my ass off, but just because I was thinking of Jarky Bacon. Not only they adapted the panel, but they extended the bit, and then they even skipped the haircut scene, which is the best Thorfinn Ylva scene. Even if that's a low bar, it's their only proper reunion. And you might say they can't go back and do it in the next season, but I'm not sure about that, because the scene is predicated on the fact Ylva doesn't know what Thorfinn wants to do with his life, and the scene where Thorfinn explains all that is adapted before the haircut now. There's some minor rearrangements like that, and the character isn't brought up at the end of this scene. I really expected to see Sigurd and his father teased, just their outlines looking at the sea or something. Instead we get to see the biggest sad of the story in his younger years, Leif Erikson. And then the Askeladd cameo was cool too. Third Dark Thorfinn is a treat, although he looks like that jacket you haven't worn at all, so it looks a bit stiff and awkward. And I see an art style change, I think, for the anime, the single line for the nose. The manga does this a lot even before, but I think it's a better choice for the anime, at least for certain characters, since it struggles with the complicated designs. The noses can often look weird in weaker scenes. Of course, I've been talking like Season 3 is guaranteed, which it's definitely not. I didn't hold out hope for Season 2, and I won't for Season 3 either. There is no reason to. Plus, I'm not attached to the adaptation. More so the weekly experience it offers. The more structured and slower paced dive into these parts of the story it allows. It's been an engaging process making these reviews. A little bit stressful, but at least I've always got something to do. But now it's back to proper videos. Almost. I'm gonna make another video that is somewhat related to Season 2, and it's not gonna be anything original, I'm sorry. It's a rant about the common complaints this arc gets. It's a low bar, I know, but I wanted to have some fun. And unfortunately, it won't be coming out soon, cause I'm going to be traveling to Japan and I'm really excited about that. So for now, go have a great summer, and I'll meet you after that with more Vinland Saga content.